Medical astrology is a fascinating way to understand the connections between physical and mental illness, overall health and wellness, and literally everything you encounter in your life. From childhood trauma to emotional patterns, behaviors, major life events and experiences, relationships, and even more obvious things like food choices and exercise, and so much more. Medical astrology gives us an intricate, nuanced look at how it's all connected to our health. And the planets are fundamental to understanding it all. In medical astrology, each planet is connected to the function of different organ systems and actions within the body. The planets are also tied to things like vitamins, minerals, micro and macronutrients, herbs, flower essences, energetic remedies, and so much more. In this video, we'll cover the 10 astrological planets and what they mean in medical astrology. While this video is going to be very comprehensive, it's not going to provide an all-encompassing list of every possible thing there is to know about each of the planets in medical astrology, simply because that would take hours to do. In fact, in my Medical Astrology Foundations course, we spend anywhere from 25 to 50 minutes on each individual planet, depending on its complexity and how much weight it carries in medical astrology. And while I would love for you to jump on the waitlist for Medical Astrology Foundations at the link below, if you're interested in medical astrology, I do have a free workshop, my Medical Astrology 101 workshop, coming up on February 29th, covering everything you know to get started with medical astrology. In my Medical Astrology 101 workshop, I'm going to give you a roadmap to learning to understand medical astrology and using it in practice, along with actual significations and interpretive skills. You're going to learn all about the planets, the zodiac signs, the houses, and the aspects in the way that these things are utilized in medical astrology. You're also going to learn about evaluating the birth chart holistically to determine overall health, wellness, and constitutional components. At the end of the webinar, we'll even start diving into what are most commonly referred to as disease signatures or illness patterns or signatures, which are the ways in which we can look at a chart and see the correspondences between what shows up in the planets and what shows up in a person's health, especially when it comes to poor health or dysfunction in the body. Basically, what you'll be getting is an overview of a very large portion of the very usable knowledge that I teach in Medical Astrology Foundations, which is my paid course that gives you everything you need to know to become a medical astrologer. And you're getting this for free in the Medical Astrology 101 workshop. Enrollment closes on February 29th, and space in the free workshop is limited, so make sure you jump down to the link below in the description to save your seat while you still can. All right, so let's get into the planets, beginning with the sun. The sun is the ruler of the sign of Leo, which is connected to the heart, thymus, back, and spinal cord. With its connection to Leo, you probably won't be surprised that the sun is connected to the function and action of the heart. The sun is the life force of our solar system, and as such, it's also connected to our energy and vital life force. The sun is involved in things like temperature regulation, cellular metabolism, and function, and is also connected to our vision, representing the right eye of a man or the left eye of a woman. Our consciousness, meaning our awakened, aware state, is also ruled by the sun. In fact, I've seen many instances where loss of consciousness in the birth chart has been linked to solar energy or solar activity. In its actions, the sun illuminates or emphasizes the body regions associated with the sign where it's placed in the birth chart. So for example, the sign of Capricorn is connected to the hair, skin, nails, bones, joints, ligaments, teeth, and even the gallbladder. With the sun in the sign of Capricorn in the birth chart, so if you were born with a Capricorn sun, those body areas, those body tissues are emphasized and made more important or prominent in some way. Notice how I say that they are emphasized, and I'm not giving a specific marker to whether or not that's positive or negative. What I mean here is that these body areas become more of a focus, they become more important in some way. Whether or not that's positive or negative depends very heavily on the dignity of the sun and the way that it's placed in the birth chart. The sun is also very literally connected to the actual sun's influence on our health and the sunlight that we take in, our skin's ability to synthesize and utilize solar energy to create nutrients like vitamin D. And so the sun in medical astrology is also connected to vitamin D, very literally. The moon is the ruler of the sign of Cancer, which is the sign connected to all of the waters and fluids of the body. Cancer rules the stomach, the pericardium, the mucous membranes, the meninges, the female reproductive system and organs, the limbic system of the brain, and the posterior pituitary gland. It also rules the gums. And so basically Cancer is all of the fluids, all of the lubrication, all of the protective sacs and membranes throughout the entire body. Because of the moon's connection to the sign of Cancer, the moon also has an association to the functions of all of these bodily fluids, all of these bodily areas, all of these protective membranes, all of these wonderful things we just talked about. And the moon plays a huge role in regulating the fluids and liquids within the body. That's one of the functions of the moon. Zooming out a bit, in traditional astrology, the moon is known to be the general significator of the body and bodily health. And that makes it extra important to focus on in medical astrology as an overall indicator, not the only overall indicator, but one of many overall indicators of general health, wellness, constitution, things like that. If you want to learn more about this, definitely sign up for my Medical Astrology 101 workshop, which again is free. If you're watching this in the future, it'll come around again. The link is still down below. You can join the waitlist. While the sun is connected to our vitality and life force energy, the moon is known to be the distributor of the vitality and life force energy of the sun throughout the body. Because of its ties to the limbic system, the moon is also super important when it comes to memory, especially episodic memory function, which is tied to the hippocampus, which is ruled by the moon under that umbrella of the limbic system. Episodic memory refers to the type of memory for events or actual things that happen in your life. Whenever you kind of think back on something and you kind of envision it as if there were a movie playing in your brain, that is episodic memory function. The moon can show how good you are at having and maintaining and recalling those types of memories accurately. Also, because it's tied to the limbic system, which has to do with not just episodic memory, but emotional memory because of the amygdala and the amygdala's connection to the hippocampus. Emotional memory is connected to the moon, which would make sense because the moon governs our emotions. So overall, you can tell a lot about how good a person's memory is by looking at the moon, which might be surprising to some of you who might be looking to Mercury instead, which is also important. We'll talk about that in just a second. Another thing that's interesting about the moon and the nervous system is the moon's connection to myelination. And so that is a process that is governed by the moon. And if there are issues with myelination, like in the case of MS, for example, the moon may be implicated in the birth chart. In its actions, the moon is connected to all of our biological rhythms, including our circadian rhythms, so our sleep-wake cycles, although there's some Neptunian connection to that as well, which we'll get into, but also the female reproductive cycle and those rhythms, the hormonal rhythms and cycles that we all have. So our diurnal rhythms, our circadian rhythms, our hormonal rhythms, our reproductive rhythms, for those who are women in reproductive age. All of these things are tied to the moon. Also, the moon is tied to our food preferences and our eating habits. If you're having trouble sticking to a healthy diet, look to the moon, among other things, to give you clues about what you need to do in order to keep yourself healthy, in order to eat the right foods. Where do you need to allow yourself indulgences, and where do you need to kind of be a little bit more structured and strict when it comes to your eating. Unconscious habits in general are ruled by the moon, including the ones that impact our health. And so that's another thing to kind of make note of if you're looking at someone's chart and you want to help them improve their health, because there's going to be habits, there's going to be cycles, there's going to be energies connected to the moon that they're not necessarily aware of, that might be sabotaging them in some way because it's just become so habitual that they don't even think about it. It's implicit. Nutrition-wise, the moon is connected to potassium, which is a nutrient that is necessary for maintaining fluid and electrolyte balance in the body. Makes sense, right? Mercury is connected to the sign of Gemini, which rules the respiratory system, upper body, arms, shoulders, hands, fingers, ears, the nerves, and the nervous system, which is co-ruled, by the way, by all of the mutable signs, the nervous system itself. So, as such, Mercury is going to be connected to all of these things. Mercury is very much connected to the brain, the nervous system, respiratory function and breathing, manual dexterity, fine motor skills and fine motor movements, the communication channels throughout the body, and so much more. Mercury also rules Virgo, which is connected to the intestines, especially the small intestine. It's also the co-ruler of the liver, along with the sign of Sagittarius. It rules the diaphragm, the spleen, and the pancreas. Virgo, just like Gemini, is also very connected to the nervous system, especially the autonomic nervous system, which governs our fight or flight versus rest and digest response, as well as the enteric nervous system, which is the nervous system that's connected to our gut. Virgo is also the co-ruler of the immune system, along with Pisces. Hopefully you're starting to see a little bit of a pattern here with the signs of the same modality co-ruling different body areas. We're going to cover this really in detail in my free Medical Astrology 101 workshop, linked down below. And of course, we covered this in Medical Astrology Foundations. Anyway, as the ruler of Gemini and Virgo, Mercury is connected to the function of all of the areas and organ systems we just discussed, especially the brain, the nervous system, those things that are ruled by both Gemini and by Virgo. As you may have already guessed, Mercury corresponds to the learning and attention functions of the brain and is also connected to speech and language processing. And so those are health things as well. We all know that Mercury rules communication, it rules speech. It can show us the way that we articulate our thoughts, the way that we learn, the way that we process information. And so it also is connected to the areas of the brain that are involved with speech and language processing and communication. Speech, by the way, is not the only aspect of communication, which is generally ruled by Mercury. Hearing is part of it as well. And so our actual ability to hear can be shown by Mercury, or our ability to not just hear, but also listen, right? To pay attention, to listen. But hearing in general and the actual function of our ears and the auditory processing centers of our brain, that is mercurial. And so you'll find with people who have hearing difficulties, usually they have some sort of affliction with Mercury. Often there's a Saturn component, and Saturn with Mercury is often associated with age-related declines in hearing. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but just know that Mercury has to do with hearing for right now. Some sources attribute all B vitamins, so the entire B complex, to the sign of Mercury, but my favorite resource, which is the book called Medical Astrology by Eileen Nauman, ties Mercury to B1 or thiamine specifically. This makes sense because thiamine deficiency can actually cause a specific type of dementia, right? Acting on the brain and affecting our memory and language skills, called Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, which is often alcohol induced. And so I like that association between Mercury and specifically B1, but it can sometimes show up with B vitamin issues in general. Venus rules the signs of Taurus and Libra. In medical astrology, Taurus rules the lower jaw, it rules the tongue, the tonsils, the throat, the thyroid, it rules the neck, the vocal cords, and certain parts of the brainstem as well. On the flip side, Libra rules the kidneys, the hips, the endocrine system in general, and the homeostatic systems within the body. Just so you know, all of the cardinal signs are in some way connected to the endocrine system, but Libra has that more all-encompassing generalized connection to the balance of hormones throughout our body and endocrine function in general. Due to its ties to the sign of Libra, Venus has a lot to do with our hormonal balance within the body, and it's especially linked to both thyroid and female hormones, but it does, encompass and represent our hormonal balance as a whole. And so the balance of the endocrine system system in general is connected to Venus. And due to its Libra connection, Venus is also tied to kidney function. Venus is also linked to physiological homeostasis through its influence on the endocrine system and maintaining proper fluid and electrolyte balance via the kidneys. Venus is known as the planet of beauty, so it should come as no surprise to anyone that Venus is connected to our physical appearance and our skin and the way that our skin appears. Saturn is technically the main ruler of the skin along with Capricorn. However, Venus shows our appearance or the appearance of the skin. And so if there are issues that are more aesthetic with the skin, that will show up with Venus, or sometimes both Venus and Saturn as well. Certain Venus placements are also tied to cysts and other benign growths. And so it's not always a positive thing, even though it's a benefic influence. In certain manifestations, in certain combinations, it can bring things that are unseemly or that are just not pleasant, but are not deadly or hazardous to our functioning in any sort of real way when it comes to things like cysts and benign growths, of course. Venus is the energy of relaxation in both general and medical astrology. It can cause tissues to become weak, loose, and leaky. It can also be a very indulgent energy, and in certain placements, it does bring a sweet tooth. Along those same lines, Venus is linked to sugar and carbohydrates and their metabolism, among other things. Mars rules the signs of both Aries in modern astrology and Scorpio in traditional astrology. Aries is connected to the head, the skull, the eyes, the optic nerves. It's the sign of action and willpower, and it's also tied to the adrenals and the frontal lobe of the brain, which makes sense. And the frontal lobe of the brain, you guys, just so you know, is co-ruled by really all of the fire signs, not just Aries, but Aries seems to be the primary, and Mars, of course, tends to be implicated with that as well. Scorpio, on the other hand, is tied to all of the excretory systems of the body, along with the prostate, cervix, urinary tract, sweat glands, nose, and sinuses. And so all of these different things can have a little bit of a Mars influence or component when it comes to medical astrology. Mars is the planet of war, and as such, it shows how the body defends itself against illness and injury. It rules the immune function, which is the body's defense against illness, as well as adrenal hormones and sympathetic nervous system function, which is the body's offense against actual physical attack. So basically, in medical astrology, Mars shows us how our body defends itself in all the different ways, either from a bear attack or an injury or recovering from a specific illness. It's tied to the inflammatory response and fevers and pain and all of these things that are also tied to injury and illness as well. It's very hot, it's very inflammatory, it's very dry, and so it's connected to these things. When we talk about injuries, we can't leave out the discussion of blood. Blood is very much ruled by Mars. Mars is blood. It's very straightforward. And speaking of blood and pain and all of these, not so nice things, Mars rules sharp instruments. It rules cutting into the body, and it rules surgeries with Pluto, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. You'll often see really strong Mars influences, especially when it comes to acute things and emergency surgeries. Mars is always acute, and you'll often see Pluto influences for different types of surgeries, which we'll talk about again in just a little bit here. Mars rules our muscles. It's the action and function of our muscular system. In men, it's also tied to sperm count, and testosterone levels. And so if you're somebody who's looking to become pregnant, or if your partner's looking to become pregnant and you're having issues with that, Mars is the place to look when it comes to the man's role in that. The main thing Mars rules in terms of nutrition is protein and iron. People who have very strong Mars placements, especially in the first house or the sixth house, tend to require meat in their diet, animal protein. Not always the case, but a lot of the time they do better when they have that in their life. And so a healthy diet that includes meat is important for very strong Mars placements because of that protein and iron connection. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, and in traditional astrology, it also rules the sign of Pisces. Sagittarius is most famous for ruling the liver, but it also rules the butt, the thighs, the sacrum, the lower back, the sciatic nerve. Sagittarius also rules the hypothalamus and the efferent nervous system, which is part of the peripheral nervous system, which actually transmits information from the brain through the rest of the body. Due to its connection to the sign of Sagittarius, Jupiter rules liver function along with fat digestion and fat metabolism, which involves the liver, pancreas, and gallbladder. Also in line with its Sagittarius rulership, Jupiter is also connected to the general condition and function of the cerebrum of the brain, as well as the higher cognitive functions of the brain. The most well-known medical astrology association for Pisces is the feet, but Pisces has rulership over so much more. Pisces rules the lymphatic system, the appendix, and the pineal gland. It co-rules the immune system with the sign of Virgo. And so a lot of these things are also associated in some way with Jupiter. Additional areas under the rulership of Jupiter include the arteries and arterial blood circulation. Body fat is also very well known for its connection to Jupiter, as well as diseases of excess. Nutrition-wise, Jupiter rules fats and cholesterol, among other things. Saturn rules both the signs of Capricorn and Aquarius. Capricorn is connected to all of the structures of the body, including the bones, ligaments, joints, connective tissue, hair, skin, nails. It also is connected to the gallbladder, as well as the anterior pituitary gland. Remember how I talked about that endocrine connection to all of the cardinal signs. As the ruler of Capricorn, Saturn is connected to the skeletal system of the body, so all of the bones of the body, including the bones of the inner ear. Saturn does have a connection to hearing due to that connection to those bones. Saturn also rules, of course, the function of the joints and the connective tissues. Because planets represent actions and functions, Saturn actually rules ossification or bone formation and the calcification of tissues in the body. It also rules stones, so things like gallstones and kidney stones, those will often show up with a very Saturnian influence. And beyond just its connection to stones, Capricorn rules the gallbladder and Saturn rules the function of the gallbladder. And so often you'll see issues with the gallbladder and gallstones connected to Saturn because of that stone, that hardening energy, but also because it very literally rules the function of the gallbladder. Aquarius, on the other hand, rules the calves, the ankles, and the Achilles tendon. It has rulership over the electrical system and the circulatory system of the body. And while all of these systems have some connection to Saturn, especially the ankles and the Achilles tendon, the electrical systems of the body are more closely aligned with Uranus, which we'll be discussing next. In its actions within the body, Saturn hardens, restricts, and slows things down. It's associated with chronic diseases and diseases of aging. In terms of mental health, Saturn can be a very important influence when it comes to issues of depression. As the planet that rules ossification, it makes sense that Saturn would be connected to calcium, among other nutrients. When we reach the non-traditional outer planets, the medical astrology associations tend to work a bit differently. However, Uranus does have close ties to the sign of Aquarius in modern astrology, and as I mentioned previously, it does have a lot to do with the electrical impulses within the body, which means the consistency and flow of the electrical currents and signals within the body. This includes the electrical systems that are well established in Eastern medicine and alternative medical modalities, but also the electrical communication systems within the body that are now formally recognized by modern Western science, like the electrical system of the heart and the brain and other areas. Uranus is also connected to the coordination of electrical rhythms within the body and body rhythms in general, especially the rhythms that we just talked about involving the brain, the heart, the nervous system, things like that. Uranus also rules nerve impulses. The influence of Uranus on the body is disruptive, spasmodic, inflammatory, and speedy. In terms of pathology, it can be tied to things like seizures and sensory processing disorders. Weirdly, Neptune's connections to medical astrology are a little less abstract than what we just talked about with Uranus. Neptune rules the lymphatic fluid along with the moon and is most closely tied to the pineal gland and pineal gland function. And so the pineal gland, among other things, is responsible for our circadian rhythms. It's our sleep-wake cycles, and that involves melatonin, which is produced by the pineal gland. And therefore, Neptune Neptune is connected to melatonin. And so if you have issues with sleep, if you have issues with your sleep-wake cycle, there are a lot of different things to look at. I'm actually going to do a whole video about insomnia and astrology, but Neptune is one of the components that you might want to take into consideration. In addition to regulating our circadian rhythms, melatonin also has an anti-inflammatory effect on the central nervous system, which is super important, and it also plays a role in regulating the immune system. And so if your melatonin is disrupted and you have some wonky Neptunian energy, that's going to affect you in more ways than just your sleep. Speaking of sleep, Neptune rules altered states of consciousness, including sleep, including dreams. But it also represents things like psychedelic experiences, trance states, and hypnosis. Certain Neptune placements and transits have been linked to unpleasant health issues such as fungal infections, mold illness, parasites, and allergies. Neptune is an energy of sensitivity. It can be tied to allergic reactions, being very sensitive to certain foods, chemicals, environmental influences. It can also be tied with autoimmunity, kind of like a confused immune system, because Neptune brings confusion. Things are not straightforward, things are not functioning in a concrete linear fashion. And so Neptune often shows up very strongly in the charts of people with autoimmunity, allergies, and various forms of immune dysfunction. Neptune makes a person's body more sensitive on all levels, and that can mean emotional, psychological, energetic, spiritual, but also on the physical level. Because Neptune makes a person or body region sensitive on all levels, it's closely tied with diseases that are psychic in origin. Whether or not you believe in that is up to you, but that is an association with Neptune, and I've seen that actually play out in people's charts before. Neptune makes us more sensitive emotionally, psychologically, energetically, and spiritually. And the way that it hits us in our chart shows where we're most sensitive in general, but also when it comes to our health. One of the big things astrologers have noted with Neptune in medical astrology is its connection to misdiagnosis and also mysterious, nebulous, hard to pin down, hard to diagnose illnesses, which is why it's often showing up really heavily in people who have chronic illnesses, those mysterious chronic diseases and diagnoses that allopathic medicine doesn't really know what to do with. And finally, let's get into Pluto, the very last planet in our solar system. In general astrology, Pluto is tied to psychological intensity, and that can translate to psychological issues when it comes to mental health in medical astrology as well. On a strictly physical level, Pluto is tied to surgeries, especially amputations and organ removals. It's the element of removal, detoxification, purging, and letting things go in a very literal sense in the body. So it rules detox, it rules purge, it rules release. As the planet most closely associated with death in modern Western astrology, it should come as no surprise that Pluto is implicated in tissue and cell death, circumstances surrounding necrosis, things of that nature in medical astrology. All that said, Pluto's most notable influence when it comes to medical astrology is on our mental health and the health of our brain. It's heavily implicated in cases of obsessive thoughts, compulsive behaviors, and actual OCD diagnosis. It's also the planet most closely associated with emotional and psychological trauma, and so it should come as no surprise that when people show up as clients with PTSD, there's often a very strong, very difficult Pluto energy involved in their chart and in that experience. That being said, Pluto breeds resilience. Often people with strong Pluto placements that are on the receiving end of the darker side of its energy can come back from anything. They have huge exponential powers of regeneration. All right, you guys, so that is all 10 planets in medical astrology. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider joining us for my free Medical Astrology 101 webinar, workshop, whatever you want to call it. The link is down in the description below. Also, think about getting on the wait list for my Medical Astrology Foundations course. Enrollment is opening soon. Like this video, share it with your friends, and comment below and let me know what you learned today. All right, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, everyone.